Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Felicia Bisnath, and I'm a second year PhD student. And I'll be talking about my QRP project today. So the topic is multimodal contact in 37 signed languages. So traditionally, we view language as being either a linear sequence of sounds or words. And this is because the majority of linguistics theory is based on spoken and written language. And these kinds of language, they are constrained in that they can only be articulated or they are traditionally represented in a single linear stream. So we also don't normally take gesture into consideration, or we have a unimodal view of language. So in this GIF, linguists would typically study just the words Kamala is saying and not what she's doing with her hand. Studying sign languages has highlighted multimodality and simultaneity because in them we see multiple channels being used at the same time for linguistic purposes. So those multiple channels are elements of the face and the hands. Now, if we consider the mouth only, there are two kinds of mouth actions, mouthing and mouth gesture. So mouthings are movements of the mouth that can be connected to spoken language words. So they are a language contact phenomenon or a product of multimodal contact between a signed and a spoken language. So in example one, we see the signer mouthing mother. So his mouth movements correspond to the mouth movements we would make when we're producing mother in English. In example two, we see a mouth gesture, and this is from Sign Language of the Netherlands. So the hands are signing something like grab something, and the mouth is indicating that a lot of grabbing is happening. So this mouth action is showing aspect, but it doesn't correspond to any Dutch word. Now, because of their association with spoken languages, the status of mouthings in sign language grammars is controversial, and their representation in linguistics is subject to the ideologies of sign language linguists. Okay, so I'm going to talk about multimodal constructions, and what I mean by this is pairings of mouthings and manual signs. So the unit of analysis here is not just the mouthing, but the pairing of the mouthing and the manual sign. And I'll be taking an ecological approach to language contact. And in this approach, we consider how social context contributes to language. So how social context affects linguistic structure. So social context can include, but it's not limited to, the properties of individuals, so their age, their gender, their social class, their deaf status, education, etc. And also properties of the community, so the proportion of deaf to hearing language users, languages in use, density of networks, and other things. And in sign language typology, an ecological approach is taken, and this divides sign languages into two groups. So in a deaf sign language, deaf people typically learn a sign language in a formal educational context, and they often interact with people who are not familiar communicating with them. And this is linked to oralism. Whereas in a rural sign language, deaf and hearing people, they can acquire a sign language as a first language outside of education, and deaf people generally interact with people who are familiar communicating with them. Now, these are my research questions, so I wanted to find out what the grammatical properties of multimodal mouthing constructions are, and if a difference in linguistic ecology results in a difference in the distribution of mouthing constructions. I looked at 37 sign languages, 26 deaf ones, and 11 rural ones. And the deaf sign languages, they account for 70% of the sample, and the rural ones, 30%. These proportions correspond to the proportion of deaf and rural sign languages in Glottolog's list of sign languages in the world. Okay, so after looking at the sample, I found about 20 different mouthing constructions. And the four major categories that you see here are the ones that I coded for. And I chose them because they were mentioned enough to show cross-linguistic differences or to potentially show cross-linguistic differences. And these construction types also share similar properties. So the first kind that I found, or that I'm going to talk about, are congruent mouthings. And in a congruent mouthing, the mouthing has the same meaning as the manual sign. So in this figure, line 1 shows the meaning of the mouthing, line 2 the meaning of the manual sign, and line 3 the meaning of the entire construction. Now, the entire construction means cat, and both the mouthing and the manual sign individually have the meaning cat. And the second type of construction here, we have morphophonological mouthing. And in this kind of mouthing construction, the manual sign is the same across a family of signs, and mouthing differentiates within the family. I found three kinds of morphophonological mouthing, polysemous, initialized, and homonyms, but I'm only going to talk about polysemous ones for the sake of time. Now, in polysemous mouthing, the manual sign is the same across a family of signs, and it has the same general meaning. And the mouthing identifies a more specific meaning, and the entire construction has the meaning corresponding to the mouthing. So in this example from Adamarobe Sign Language, and that's used in Ghana, we can see that the manual sign has a general meaning sense, and the mouthing identifies specific kinds of sense, and in this example, it's colors. So together, the manual sign and the mouthing identify a specific color. And the blue lines that we see here, they show that within a family, each mouthing is semantically related to each other, and they're also semantically related to the manual sign. Now, the third kind that I looked at was, I'm calling it morphosyntactic mouthing. And in this kind of mouthing construction, the mouthing and the manual sign have independent meanings. And when they come together as a construction, they have a composite meaning. So in this example from Jakarta Sign Language, the sign children, when combined with the mouthing together, they have a phrasal meaning. So this entire construction means together with the children. And the last kind of construction that I looked at were free mouthings, and basically in this kind, the mouthing does not occur with a manual sign, and that means the entire meaning of the construction is coming from just the mouthing. In this figure here, I'm showing how the different constructions are related to each other using these three properties. This is work in progress, so there's stuff that will probably change in here and probably things that can be disputed. But the main point here is that all of these constructions are related. Okay, and this here we have the actual data. So the stuff that you see in this kind of yellowish, orangish color, that's the percentages for deaf sign languages. In the white, we see the percentages for rural sign languages, and in this reddish orange, that's the percentages for the entire sample. So looking at this, we can see that mouthing is found in most of the sample. Here we go. So in 89% of the sample, we find mouthing. Previous research has suggested that mouthing occurs to a lesser extent in rural sign languages, but this data doesn't seem to support that. Okay. And next here, I just want to talk a little bit about these congruent mouthing numbers. The numbers here for congruent mouthing, they're probably higher. Linguists, they probably don't mention this kind of mouthing a lot because it doesn't produce a difference in meaning. I think I would find higher numbers if I look at actual sign language use, which I probably will. Okay, and lastly, it seems like there may be a difference in how morphophonological constructions are reported between rural and deaf sign languages. I don't have enough numbers to actually check for a statistical difference, but this is something that I will look into more. And it seems that linguists might record this kind of mouthing more because it produces a meaning difference. Okay, so I have some final thoughts here, and we can probably talk more about stuff in the questions. So mouthings, they don't seem to clearly distinguish deaf and rural sign languages. So this suggests that a difference in linguistic ecology may not result in a difference in linguistic structure. Or another way of saying this is that there may be multiple routes to the same structure. And finally, this kind of study is limited by the data that is recorded in the literature. And what is recorded is linked to the ideologies of linguists. So if linguists don't consider mouthings to be a part of a sign language, their use doesn't get recorded, and then we don't get an accurate picture of how spoken language contact influences sign languages. This is all I will say for now, and we could probably talk more in the questions. Okay, so thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing your questions.